The UK's Prime Minister says he is considering blocking a bill in Scotland which makes it easier for transgender people to legally change their gender.
Last week, the Scottish Parliament voted to lower the age when people can apply to change their legal gender to 16 and remove the need for medical diagnosis. Some UK officials now say they're worried about the impact on women and children's safety.
For more reaction, we're joined by Nigel Farage, a former Brexit Party leader, host of Farage on GB News. Nigel, welcome, and thanks so much for coming on and really bringing this story to our viewers who might not be aware it's happening overseas. Why is this such a priority for Scottish Parliament right now, and would Scotland veto a decision it does not support?
Well, Nicola Sturgeon is, of course, the leader of Scotland in the Scottish Parliament, which has only been established for 20 years, and that point is significant, and I'll come back to it. And she's trying to turn Scotland into the People's Socialist Republic of woke and lunacy. Somehow she thinks it's an urgent priority that 16-year-olds without a medical diagnosis of gender dysphoria, without any need for parental consent whatsoever, can say that if they've used a different pronoun, the pronoun of the opposite sex to which they were born, for the last 6 months, they can legally change their gender. Now, I find this astonishing. I certainly don't think a majority of people in Scotland would see this as a priority and support it. And into this, Rishi Sunak is saying, well, hang on a second, we've got national legislation. What you're deciding at Scottish level may well contradict the law that we have for the whole United Kingdom. So it's a bit like an American row between the states and the federal government. It's just that we're very new at this. We've only had these devolved powers in Scotland for a couple of decades. Now, I noticed that Rishi Sunak hasn't been very clear on this because the British Conservative Party have tended to fly the rainbow flag quite a lot themselves. There is now a genuine backlash, and it's being led in Scotland in many ways by the Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling. And she's making the argument that if somebody aged 16 or older can simply change their sex on a whim, change their gender on a whim, and be allowed to go into female safe spaces, and I'm talking here about changing rooms, locker rooms, prisons, that may well provide a real threat to women and their safety. And now there's a debate, finally, a debate in the United Kingdom about, well, hang on a second, 100 years ago, the suffragettes were fighting very hard for women to get the vote, for women to have equality, and suddenly it seems women are being downgraded and that being feminine isn't valued anymore. So it's a really big debate, and it's going to be very interesting to see whether Rishi Sunak really stands up and fights this.
Nigel, you mentioned that debate that's happening in the UK now. We've been having this debate now for a few years here in the United States, not just in the fields of medicine, but in education, even the military. What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? A new study out of the UK nonprofit Sex Matters found that gender-affirming care for children has no basis in medicine. What is the medical community talking about in the UK right now? Is there a consensus around transgender care? Do they support it, or is this, is this a unified bloc one way or another?
Oh, generally, what we get from our medical profession on this is silence. They're not saying very much at all. They feel pushed and pulled from both directions. Where we are seeing it, though, is in sport. And sport is beginning to say, this is nonsense. Anybody that has been through male puberty that decides later on to become female and want to play, soccer, rugby, go swimming, go cycling, compete in the Olympics, sport is now saying, hang on, we've had enough of this so far and no further. So sport is leading the way. I sense that many medical professionals are frankly scared to speak out on this subject. And if you look at what's happened to J.K. Rowling, and all she's done after all is to defend women's safety and women's rights. She's been cancelled. She wasn't even invited to an anniversary of the Harry Potter films, excluded from society, bombarded with hate online. And what you see with this trans rights movement is not a group of people arguing for conscience, arguing for tolerance. We're all for that. What you see is a group of people who are prepared to bully and fight to suppress a majority view by using very nasty tactics. So thank you, America, for sending this one across the pond to us. I know you've been battling with it for some years, and we're now fighting our own battles over here.
Yeah, and again, these procedures, of course, in many cases are irreversible, right? So taking the time to actually think through them and the consequences is maybe a good reminder and worth a pause. I wanted to ask you, before we let you go, Nigel, as we look ahead to the new year, the relationship between the UK Prime Minister and President Biden, what do we anticipate going forward? Is there some common ground that we're looking forward to in 2023?
Well, I'm afraid the problem is that we had in Donald Trump a very pro-British American president. You know, he recognized the fact that since 1917, we fought side by side in virtually all of the big battles that have mattered. And in Joe Biden, we have a profoundly anti-British president. He doesn't even try and hide it. He's got a romantic idea about Irish republicanism. And so the prospects of a trade deal, something which should have been concluded years ago, the prospects of a genuine trade deal between us don't look good to me. And that's a real shame, because the UK is the biggest overseas investor in America. America is the biggest overseas investor here. We speak the same language, we watch the same films, we listen to the same music, we have a very much shared common culture. And for us not to have that trade deal, I think is damaging to both the US and the UK economy. And frankly, I don't see anything changing. All the while, Biden is in the White House.
All right. We'll wait and see what happens to the friendly relationship between our two countries. Nigel Farage, thanks for joining us today. Appreciate the conversation.